Before I dive into my message, I told this story yesterday to the chairs, which I think is crazy. Like, half the audience is chairs. Like, you guys realize I'm a one-trick pony. I talk about the same thing today versus yesterday. I appreciate your guys' support, and hopefully during the Q&A session, I get a chance to answer some of the other questions. Yesterday, an hour wasn't long enough. A number of people came up and said, hey, could we get 2 hours with you? And I'm like, I don't really set the calendar or the schedule. Talk to Cheryl. So about 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to speak. And speaking to entrepreneurs and owners is one thing. This group was about 200 CFOs. And the introduction was probably 10 minutes long. It was way too long. And the guy talks at the end. He's like, bring your hands together for John Ruhlin and his game-changing gift strategy. And I walk up, and it's crickets. And almost in unison, every single guy, every CFO in the audience crosses their arms. And the oxygen gets sucked out of the room. And you can tell they're like, really, dude, you're going to talk about gifting and generosity for an hour? Like, do you realize we cut those budgets first? Like, are you insane? Do you not know your audience? And so if you're here and you're wondering, like, man, my chair drugged me here, or why am I here? Like, does this really apply to my business? This seems warm and foofy. A number of the chairs came up and they're like, man, really a gifting guy? Like, that seems like a weird thing to end on. I understand the doubts. And so what I'll say is suspend those doubts for just 10 minutes and give me a chance to get into the core of what I'm going to talk about. Because I think by the end of this message, you'll walk away with not only tools to make your business better, it will affect how you treat your family and all of your relationships. So before I dive in, a lot of times people are like, John, we hear about the Chicago Cubs and UBS. Like, did you just get lucky? Like, where were you born? Were you born in like LA and Hollywood and the country club and you got the cool like connections, like, silver spoon in your mouth? The exact opposite's true. Anybody from the Midwest? Show of hands from the Midwest. I'm an Ohio farm boy. Grew up on one of 6 kids on 47 acres. We had a 1-acre garden, 15 acres of hay that we baled. We heated our house with wood. It was like, the Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone style. It was a working farm. And I got to do one of the more fun and sexy things on the planet before I went to school every day. I got to go and milk goats at 6 a.m. It was amazing. I'm out there 6 a.m. I was telling the guys yesterday, like, the one thing I could do to this day, like this muscle in my thumb, I could shoot cats from here to the back of that room. Like that's how I kept myself kind of, occupied at 6 a.m. Like, I hated the work. And I decided I'm going to get really good grades, and I'm going to go be a doctor. My mom was into health and wellness. I was going to make mom proud. And so I go to Malone University. I'd started a side business working for Time Warner Cable, making like $50 an hour because they got paid per part. And I fell off that ladder 2 different times within 6 months, almost died. And I was like, this whole blue-collar thing, God's trying to tell me something. Like, how about you cut that out and find something else? And so I'm looking around. I could go work at Gap or work at a restaurant as a waiter. And I found out a buddy of mine who was in seminary. And he couldn't sell water to somebody in the middle of the desert, started selling these Cutco knives. Anybody familiar with Cutco? Had a college student come over? So I'd never heard of Cutco. I was like, if Steve Wiggers can do it, I can at least try. I went into the interview, wore my glasses to look smarter. I wore the one tie I had, like I was that nervous, and I get hired. And my 3rd appointment changed my life. I was dating a girl. Her dad was an attorney. And he was on the board of trustees at the school, and he was an awesome attorney, but he was the kind of guy that seemed to be involved in everything in town. He owned the oil wells, the bank, the real estate, everything. And when you're poor, or you grow up poor, you notice when people are really generous. And Paul was the guy that would find a deal on noodles, and he was in the heart of Amish country. He'd buy a semi-load of noodles, and everybody at church the next Sunday would end up with 20 cases, like a year's supply. And I'm doing the math. I'm like, Paul, that was 20, 30 G's, for noodles. I'm like, why would you do that? And Paul, sits back in his chair and he's like, John, did you see their smiles? I'm like, even the most evil person on the planet would smile if they got a year's supply of noodles. I'm like, Paul, I just don't get it. And he's like, that's just who I am. I saw the opportunity, I did it. And he'd find the school auction would raffle off the Harley. He'd buy half the tickets. Magically, he'd win the Harley, and then he'd donate it back to the school. I'm like, Paul, we could have split profits on that and sold it on eBay. I'm like, I would pay for a semester of college. So I work up the courage. I'd pitched him I'd pitched him knives. He bought a set for himself and his 3 unmarried daughters. He was that kind of guy. And I came back to him. I'm like, Paul, you're always giving things away. you're this rainmaker. Like, everybody loves you. Everybody comes to you with their ideas. I was like, maybe he'll buy, all of his clients are like financial advisors, home builders, lumber yards, insurance companies. Maybe he'll buy pocket knives for all these CEOs. And so I'm working up the courage. It's the second time in 2 weeks. I'm pitching my girlfriend's dad knives. Like, that's just an awkward conversation. It's literally before church. It's like just horrible. And Paul didn't make me feel awkward. He's about 60 at the time, gray, salt and pepper hair. He leans back in his chair and he says, John, I don't want the pocket knives. Could I order paring knives? I'm like, it's kind of chauvinist, but I'm like, you want to give a bunch of grown men like a kitchen tool? I'm like, Paul, I'm desperate. I'll sell you as many paring knives as you want, but why? And he said, John, in 40 years in business, the reason I have more deal flow, referrals, access, opportunity, I found out one simple truth. And that's if you take care of the family, everything else in business seems to take care of itself. So for me, it was like, as a 20-year-old, it was like somebody hit me upside the head with a 2x4. It's like, it wasn't about the knife. Although to this day, people, like we got interviewed for Business Insider, and the reporter's like, John, what's the hot new gift that's so great? And I started laughing. I'm like, you're gonna think I'm insane. I'm like, stupid knives. And they're like, no, you still sell the knives? I'm like, professional sports teams, financial advisors, doesn't matter the industry, most of it is tied to a bunch of married people, a bunch of married guys running companies, and oftentimes taking care of the family and giving them something that they can use with their family and their kids and entertaining and foodies. And I'm like, to this day, it's still one of our biggest products that we work with. And they're like, oh my gosh, that makes sense, but really, knives? And so I looked at Paul at 60, and I'm like, I'm gonna mimic what he does, because I want his life when I'm 60. I'm this poor college kid, and I'm like, I want the relationships, I want the family, I want the engagement. And so I started, instead of buying beer in college, I was buying $300 Cutco carving sets. And I engraved the CEO's name, spouse's name on a carving set, and I'd want to get a meeting with like a $200 million company. And I'm in my dorm room packaging this up, and I write a little handwritten note that says, carve out 5 minutes for me. I promise to be worth your time. I mail it off. 2 weeks later, I get a call from Mr. Smith's assistant. Hey, Mr. Smith was really impressed with that package. He'd like to meet with you 3 o'clock on Tuesday. I'm like, crap, I got class. Oh, well, yep, 3 o'clock works. Hang up, put my one suit I have on. I walk into this boardroom. It's mahogany, it's beautiful. I walk in, I'm scared to death. In walks Mr. Smith, he's like 65. And he's like, you can tell he's confused. He's like, are you John Ruhlin? I'm like, yes, sir. He's like, the John Ruhlin that sent me the knives and the package. Yep. He's like, man, I thought you'd be like some seasoned sales executive like in their 50s. He's like, I'm confused. Are you here to sell me knives? I nervously laugh. And I'm like, no, sir, I'm here to help you and your 1,000 sales reps do exactly what I did to your top 10,000 relationships, to turn them into your personal sales force, to open doors with referrals and access, to get your employees to not just be sitting there collecting a paycheck, but to be actively loyal. And Mr. Smith's like, jaw hits the ground. He's like, you're really good. I'm like, thank you. An hour later, I walked out of there with a PO for 1,000 knife sets. Cutco red flagged it. They thought it was fraud. You can ask the owner to this day. They thought I'd stolen a credit card, I was selling them over in Europe, or I was selling them on eBay, but there wasn't enough room in the blanks to put the number 1,000. Nobody ever ordered 1,000 of anything. And they're like, who is this for? And I'm like, it's for a company. Like, why would this insurance company order 1,000 knife sets? And I'm like, because they're using gratitude and gifting as this profit center to generate referrals and to generate engagement. We're using gratitude and gifting as this competitive advantage. And they're like, what? Like, we're a knife company. I'm like, but you don't understand. Like, if you do this well, like, this is how it can work. And over the next couple of years, we started to land more and more deals. We started to get referred into pro sports teams. And by the time I was a senior in college, I'd put med school permanently on hold. And I started a company because I'd become, out of 1.5 million reps for Cutco in their 70-year history, we became their #1 rep all time. So when we talk about what I'm going to talk about today and walk you through this system, it's not based in like academia and this like, oh, this hypothesis. Like what I've been doing for the last 19 years and what we've been helping companies do for the last 19 years is to use gifting and gratitude to do 4 things. Drive referrals, turn their clients and partners into their own personal sales force, to engage their employees and to show real gratitude and inspire them to want to act on their behalf, to fill seats on your bus. and to gain access to impossible to reach new clients, prospects, and influencers. There's 5 parts to the system I'm going to talk about. There's actually in the book, Giftology, that we wrote about 3 years ago, there's 10, but there's 5 important parts I think that are the most important. I'm going to talk about 4 of them. I'm going to open up for Q&A, and then I'm going to wrap up at the 5th. Sound good? It's 5 parts to the recipe. First part. By the way, that's me on the farm there, if you're wondering. I'm the cool kid on the right there with the denim on denim. It's pretty... is personalization. Personalization. About 13 years ago, I had the opportunity to go to this event, and it was similar to C12. It was called EO, and I signed up for this thing, went out to Vegas. There's 1,200 CEOs from around the world, and I almost left because I didn't feel like I belonged. I don't know if you've ever gone to an event, you're like, I'm out of my league here. Like, I found out one of the guys had wanted to bring Kiss in to perform, and they didn't have the budget, so he cut the $250,000 check personally for himself to pay. And I'm like, I barely qualify to be in this group, and you're cutting $250,000 checks for a band, not even a good band. I'm like, this is nuts. I'm like, so I almost left the conference, but I'd paid 10 grand to be there. And I was like, John, you better get $10,000 worth of value. So one of the breakouts I go to, this guy, Cameron Harold, if you've never read any of his books, he's got 5 books out. Double Double is one of them. Fantastic. Everything that came out of his mouth was gold. And I decided I want Cameron as a mentor, advisor, somebody to coach me. And I know I can't afford his coaching. It's like 15 grand a month. So I'm waiting in line. I found out he's coming to Cleveland, where I was living at the time, to our local chapter 4 months later. And I'm like, I got to impress this guy and inspire him to want to just kind of take me on as a pet project. And so I'm like, you know what? The night before, I looked at the dates. I'm like, I have lower level seats to LeBron. It's opening night for the Cavs. We'll go out to a steak dinner, Cavs game. By the end of this, we'll be high-fiving, and we're going to be boys. That's what I'm cooking up in my head. So I wait an hour, get the camera. I'm like, hey, I hear you're coming to town. He's like, yeah. I said, what are you doing the night before? He's like, I'm not sure. I said, hey, I got lower level seats to LeBron. You know, like, you want to go to a steak dinner? And I'm expecting him to, like, hug me. And he looks at his calendar, and he's like, I don't have anything else going on. I guess I'll go. And it felt like somebody punched me right in the gut. And I was like, oh, my gosh, duh. Like, a lot of our best relationships, clients, partners, employees, whatever else, especially people at the highest levels, what do they do when they travel or they go to conferences? They go out to nice meals, they go to games, they go golfing. They do the same thing over and over again. So the dinner and the ball game meant nothing to him, probably like a lot of your relationships and mine too. So I was like, oh my gosh, on my feet, I'm thinking, I got to do something else to get him hooked. And I said, what else are you going to do in your town? He's like, I'd probably go shopping. And I'm thinking, well, maybe this is my angle. I said, where at? He said, I'm from Canada. There's not a ton of Brooks Brothers in Canada. I'm going to go shopping at Brooks Brothers. And so on the spot, I'm like, hey, I'm a Jose Bank guy. I want to send you a shirt. What's your shirt size? And he looks at me kind of bewildered, like, does this dude have a man crush on me? Like that's a weird question to ask another man within 2 minutes of meeting. But he's from Canada, and he, that kind of like, subtle charm, he didn't make me feel uncomfortable. He actually told me the size. I said, great, I'll send you a shirt, and when you get in town, we'll go to dinner and a ball game. So I called my business partner. I'm like, Rod, he just bought 50% of Giftology, by the way. And he's more the CFO kind of person. And I said, Rod, we have to do this thing. It could change our business forever. And Rod's response after a 30-minute or 30-second pause was, John, that is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. Are you insane? That's like our budget for like 6 months or a year of, no way, absolutely not. And I hang up the phone defeated. I'm like, oh, yeah, you're right. So 4 months go by. It's the morning of. Cameron's supposed to be flying in. He starts texting me, my flight's delayed. I'm not going to get in time. Do you just want to cancel? I'm like, he's trying to bail in on the dinner and the ball game. He could give 2 rips about that. I said, no, whenever you get in, we'll just go, when we at the hotel. He said, okay, fine. So I called Rod back. I'm like, Rod, we have to do this. He's not going to have time to go shopping, blah, blah, blah. And he said, John, do you believe in it enough that if it doesn't work, it comes out of your personal draw? I was like, Rod, yes, I believe in it enough. He's like, okay, I think it's a stupid idea, but go for it. So I hang up the phone, jump in the Suburban, drive an hour up to Cleveland, go into the Brooks Brothers, put the Amex down, the sizes. I said, I want one of everything in your new fall collection, all your jackets, suits, belts, pants, everything. And that was the response of the junior sales associate. He laughed out loud. He's like, you're joking, right? And with a deadpan face, I'm pouring with sweat already. I'm so nervous. I said, no, I wish I was. I want it all. He's like, okay. They gather everything up. They go to run the credit card. It's over $7,000 in close. I'm like, oh my gosh, this better work. So I pack up the Suburban, go over to the Ritz. I said, hey, I asked for the GM, one of the top business coaches in the entire world is coming to town. He coaches the Sheikh of Qatar and his 300 companies. Do you want to do something impressive and amazing? What's the Ritz? What do they say? I said, sure, what are you thinking? I said, I want to merchandise this hotel room to look like a Brooks Brothers store. Here's the clothes, jackets here, pants, suits, everything. They're like, we've never done that before, but sure, we can do that. So they merchandise everything. I go downstairs into the lobby. I'm not a big drinker at all, but I had like a triple on the rocks, and I'm drinking like this. And my business partner gets there an hour later, and he is chiming in my ear. He's going to think you're a stalker. This is the worst idea ever. I'm like pouring with sweat. I'm almost ready to hyperventilate. And Cameron comes into the lobby a couple hours later, and it's one of those travel days where all he wants to do is probably go take a shower and go to bed. He has no desire to go to dinner, ball game. He doesn't know me from Adam. And I said, Cameron, I know you're probably tired. Go take a shower, come down whenever you're ready. We'll miss half the game. It's not a big deal. He comes down about 25 minutes later. He gets off the elevator, and he's like floating. He's got this big smile on his face. He's like, there's like this halo around him. He says, John, I've had a lot of people treat me really well when I fly first class over Dubai and all this other stuff. And I thought that was amazing customer service. He said, whatever you want to talk about, for as long as you want to talk about it, I'm all ears. He's like, I've never had anybody that has made me feel the way you're making me feel right now. Now, what's interesting, I spoke at Google and some of these other places, and they're like, John, $7,000 for all of our customers. Like, we go broke. And I'm like, really, Google? Like, you got slides in your lobby and all this other stuff. I'm like, I don't know if you go broke, but okay. Like, if you're focusing on the $7,000, you're missing the point. Because what Cameron came back to me and said, John, the personalization, what you did, the acts, the generosity, that was the gift. I can't let you buy the clothes on top of that. So either one of two things are going to happen. Either you're going to tell me how much they cost. I picked out a few things. I couldn't take it all with me. And I'm going to write you a check for that. Or I'm going to guess, I'm going to round up by 50%, and I'm going to send you a check for that. So that entire experience cost me $0. And the reason we're now charging literally $25,000 to $50,000 to speak at big companies and conferences and whatever else is because before I had a book and before anybody knew who that John Ruhlin was, when Cameron was double booked, he'd tell the event planner or the CEO, you got to book John. And they're like, well, what's his fee? And he'd be like, $15,000. And they're like, okay, if you say it, done. And they'd book me. And I started to get doors open to companies. He was working with like the CEO of Sprint and huge, like the people that he was working with, every single one of them. If I wanted an introduction, he'd send them gifts. Like he did things for me that $10 million in advertising couldn't do, all because of that one act. And what's interesting about that conversation is the $7,000 wasn't the key. Like I could have put $7,000 on a gift card and given it to him. It wouldn't have had the same effect. And you can't necessarily, whether you're a small company that's doing $2 million or a big company that's doing $2 billion, you can't do $7,000 experiences for everybody. It's just not feasible to do that every single time. But the one thing that you can do that for us, I will not send out a gift for myself or when clients hire us to do all their gifting for them, I will not do it unless they do one thing. And that's personalize it with one thing, and that's their name. And in 2019, people were like, oh, it doesn't matter. Just leave it blank or we'll throw a logo on it. Like, who cares? And I'm like, well, the Miami Dolphins are our first NFL client. And Stephen Ross, anybody know who Stephen Ross is? He's worth like $9 billion. Lives in New York and Miami most of the time. But he gave, about 5 years ago, $250 million, $250 million to the University of Michigan, which, growing up in Ohio and being a Buckeye fan, like royally ticked me off. I'm like, $250 million is a lot of money. And I'm like, why would he do that? Is he really that into higher ed? I'm like, maybe. He doesn't even spend that much time in Michigan. Why would he do that? Here's my hypothesis. What's going to be on the side of 100 buildings for the next 200 years? His name. It's going to be the Stephen A. Ross cafeteria, the Stephen A. Ross, business center. If it's important enough for somebody worth $9 billion that their name is that important, how much more important is it for your director of marketing or your client's assistant or the janitor? We all, it's not rocket science. All the books talk about, the sound of our name is one of the most powerful things. Our name is so important. In Bible times, think about it. The name, you became your name. Our names are that important, yet in business, we think it doesn't matter. Let's put a logo on it. It doesn't matter. Leave it generic. I won't send out a single gift. If you talk to the chairs that received the gift here from C12, notice it didn't just have, a logo or anything. It actually had no logo. It was personalized to the person, their family, their spouse. That personalization, we all crave it. We can't automate it. Like, we crave being treated as an individual, and that takes it from being just some random thing that shows up. We don't need more stuff. Do you guys agree? Like, most people's closets are ready to, like, blow up. I mean, I have a box by our door for Goodwill. Like, the amount of stuff that we have to give away or give to Goodwill, like in America, we're blessed. But we all have room for an artifact, and the personalization is what takes it from being stuff to being something that's personal and an artifact. The personalization is massive. The second part of the system, the recipe, and you can't cut corners on any of these, because oftentimes people are like, oh, yeah, we got a gifting guy. And I'm like, oh, really? Like, what do you put on the gifts? They're like, oh, we put our logo. They're all proud. I'm like, if you don't follow each part of the recipe, it will not have the same effect. And the second part of the recipe is the inner circle. This was one of Paul's secrets. About 14 years ago, I get this random unlisted call on my cell phone. And I pick up, and on the other line it says, hey, John, this is Cheyenne. I work for the Orlando Magic, and we hear you do these great knife sets and all these other things to gifts for teams and whatever else. We were thinking, could we order like 150 to 200 carving sets to give out around the NBA and to our top partners and sponsors? And I'm like, one of my buddies knows that one of my dreams is to have an NBA client. I'm getting punked right now. Like, there's no way the Orlando Magic, I had no connection to, randomly call me out of the blue and order a couple hundred gifts. Like, that just doesn't happen. So with the 1% chance that it was real, I played along. I said, sure. How many do you need? Yeah, we need about 150 to start. Okay, great. What's the credit card? Write it down. Hang up. I'm like, I just got to prove that this doesn't exist. Like, this is just a prank call. My buddies are pulling one over on me. And so I called the main number at the Orlando Magic headquarters. And I said, hey, is Cheyenne there? And they said, sure, we'll put you right through. I'm like, oh, crap. Cheyenne gets on. Hey, John, can I help you? And I'm like, yeah. I was wondering, do you want those shipped to your arena or to the practice facility? She's like, the arena's fine. And I'm like, okay. I hang up. I'm like, holy crap, this is real. And so we start doing these gifts, executing all the gifts for the Magic to key executives, sponsors, partners, suite owners, whatever else. And over the next 3 years, like a lot of you, you take your best relationships, your best clients. Who's cutting the check? The CEO, director of marketing, VP of sales, whatever. And we sent Alex, the CEO, who is the main person, we sent him a gift once a quarter. We built him a knife set that was a couple $1,000s. We sent him leather goods. We did all this stuff. But unlike most people on the planet, we sent the same gift or nicer to Cheyenne. One gift to Alex, one gift to Cheyenne, one gift to Alex, one gift to Cheyenne. Never asking for anything. It wasn't like, hey, now give me a referral. Hey, now do more business with me. It was just because. Appreciate the partnership, appreciate the relationship. So this goes by for about 2.5 years, and I'm going to be speaking in Orlando. I'm like, man, I've never even met Cheyenne. I've never even met Alex. It'd be great to get some time with them. And so I call Cheyenne, and she's like, absolutely, I'll get you 5 minutes with Alex, no matter what. I'm like, awesome. So going about my business, an hour later, phone rings. Cheyenne's like, hey, what are you doing that entire afternoon? And I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking, I got 5 important meetings. But I'm like, this is the Orlando Magic and this Alex's assistant. I'm like, me and Alex could have this like brainstorming session, this bro session. We're gonna like take over the NBA together. Like, that's what I'm cooking up in my head. I'm like how often does a CEO want to like spend the afternoon with you? And I'm like, this is amazing. I'm like, nothing I can't cancel. And she said, clear your afternoon. High-fiving myself. I'm so excited. A couple months go by, I fly in that day, go up to the office, meet Cheyenne. She gives me a big hug. In comes Alex about 5 minutes later, shakes my hand. He's like, John, we love the gifts. Everybody sends jerseys and basketballs in our, it gets old. Like, these guys have 5 basketballs and 3 jerseys. They don't need more of that. The knives and other stuff you've done, everybody loves it. So unusual. You're in great hands with Cheyenne, and less than 5 minutes later, he shakes my hand and he walks out the door. So I have pasted on my face, like this fake smile. I'm trying to like not act like I'm ticked, but I'm ticked. And Cheyenne like gets a smirk on her face, and she can tell that I'm kind of half upset. And she's like, John, follow me. She walks me down the hallway and walks me into this boardroom. It's all mahogany and glass and whatever else. And anybody who ever worked with a pro sports team, like negotiate on things? So I don't know if it's been this way for you or not, but like oftentimes when you go to meet with a team, there's this air of like ego. It's like we're like when you think about it, like Pepsi pays hundreds of millions of dollars to be associated with the NFL, or Budweiser will pay $1 billion to be associated with the NFL, whatever it is. And so they're used to getting things either for free or people are paying them a lot of money. And so we've always said, we're not going to sell to a team unless we make profit, and good profit. Like, they're sometimes a pain. And so when I walked in and saw 6 people around the table, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, the walls are going to go up. They're going to, like, trying to beat me down. Like, who are these people? And we walk in, it was actually 6 gals, and 3 of them walk over, and I don't know who they are, and they give me a hug. And I'm like, looking for the cameras. I'm like, what is going on? Like, this is just doesn't compute. It's weird. Like, what is up? Am I being punked again? And they sit down, and the one gal who's in charge of suites is like, John, for the last 2.5 years, Cheyenne will not shut up about the John Ruhlin giftology guy and how nice he is and how everybody's sent and all this other stuff. We know we're going to order some stuff from you. Can you just show us what you have to offer so we can pick it out and buy it? I'm like, what? I'm like, sure. So for the next 3 hours, we talk about season ticket orders and suites and sponsorship and all this other stuff. And they were like, no walls. They were just like, oh, that's a great idea. We love that. Yeah, let's do that. And I walked out of there. I don't know if you've ever had this, where you walk out of a meeting or a partnership kind of thing for the first time, and you're like, this just is too good to be true. Like, they're going to not return my email. They're going to go dark. The person's going to get fired. Like, something's going to go wrong. This is going to die in the vine. This is never going to happen. Anybody, show of hands, any ever happen? So I'm like, this is not going to work. Like, I'm like, but I'll play along. So follow up with an email. 3 weeks later, they say, yep, we're still on. A couple months, and they're like, hey, we have the project that they started talking about was 1,000 of their 25-year season ticket orders that they wanted to do something amazing for. And I was like, 1,000 people? I'm like, this is okay. I'm like, that's going to lose a 0 and become 100 or something. But sure enough, 4 months later in January, they committed, and they placed an order for 1,000 of these custom pieces. And to this day, it's the top 15 highest grossing margin deal that we've ever done. It's our first 6-figure deal with a pro sports team. Now, I'll ask you the question. Imagine if I followed the playbook that maybe a lot of you guys do and a lot of our clients have done in the past, and I only sent a gift to Alex over those 2.5 years. Would I have landed that deal? And what I'm going to say is I would not a chance, because I treated what Paul calls the inner circle and what we focus a lot on, I treated her like a peer, not a pawn, not a gatekeeper. I treated them as an equal. And so my budget this year for gifting, we'll give out personally about $250,000 or about $500,000 worth of gifts. 80% of that, whether it's for an employee or for a client, a partner, prospect, a vendor, 80% of that is targeted not at the executive, not at the decision maker, not at the figurehead. It's targeted at their inner circle. First person being their spouse. When we did gifts for C12, I'm like, I won't do the gifts unless you can get me spouses' names. And oftentimes I get pushback. People are like, well, does it really matter? Like, can't we just put family? And I'm like, I've had people that are worth $100 million, their spouse comes up, oftentimes a wife, and they're like, they're blinged out in $1 million in jewelry. They'll come up crying. And they're like, John, this is the first time in 30 years anybody treated me like an equal and not arm candy. The name of the spouse matters. Treating the entire family matters. We all know this. I mean, a number of the chairs said, you know what, I'm coming back because I want my spouse to hear your message. Like, the family is so important, and yet in business we think it's transactional. Let's take our guys hunting. Let's take them to the NASCAR races. Let's take them golfing. Guess what? All of your competitors are doing the same things. But treating somebody as a family unit and including the spouse, you can invest $1,000 and get $100,000 in impact. And so most of the gifting that we do includes the spouse, the assistant, the kids, and the fourth one is crazy. It's pets. 2019, people treat their pets, oftentimes, if they don't have kids, they treat them like kids. And so when we're walking a client through and saying, hey, we're going to do this gifting program, the guys oftentimes in the room are like, we want to send golf, and we want to send bourbon, and we want to send wine, and we want to send, I'm like, forget all that stuff. Are they married? Yes. They have a family? Yes. Do they have a kitchen at their house? Yes. We come at it completely differently. And when you treat people, when you treat that inner circle like an equal and love on them, they become, like, if somebody wants to get to me, they take care of Lindsay, my wife, or my girls. I get treated like, I get to golf. I shouldn't be allowed on Pebble Beach. I get to golf Pebble Beach. I get, when I travel, I get these amazing dinners and wine. When I spoke 2 years ago in San Diego, I remember, I land and I'm speaking after Magic Johnson, one of my childhood heroes at this huge event. San Diego, January, it's beautiful. My wife, all 3 of my girls got the flu the same time. It's coming out of both ends. My wife is texting me pictures. It's like, it's a nightmare for her. And most of your business relationships are the same way. Like when we travel as business executives or as owners, and your clients are that way, and your employees are that way, when you can take and honor the people that are around them, that are oftentimes getting the worst end of business, and treat them like an equal, and love on them, and appreciate them, and acknowledge them. I mean, the amount of tears that are shed, and it's not to be manipulative. It's a biblical principle. Honor the family, honor the other person, treat people as equals. Like, this isn't rocket science. I'm not making up stuff. Like, this has existed for 2,000 years this way. It's amazing how when you treat the inner circle that way, the impact that has on not only your internal customer, your employees, but also on your clients. It's part of the secret sauce, and so many people don't get it. Third part of the system. It's timing. I had the opportunity to speak about 15 years ago at this ag business conference. It was at Purdue, Monsanto, John Deere, all these huge companies are speaking. I almost canceled. Ironically enough, I'm an introvert. I hated speaking. I hated being in front of people. And so I had the opportunity to speak at this event with the owner of Cutco, and I almost canceled because I was that nervous. For 6 months, I'm like, my stomach is doing somersaults, like diarrhea, like you name it, like bad. And so it's funny now that I'm speaking on the biggest stages in the world, it's a God thing. Like I literally had somebody prophesy over me 10 years ago. Only time it's ever happened. He said, and he didn't know me from Adam. He said, God's telling me you're going to speak on the biggest stages in the world. I laughed in his face. So I was like, I hate speaking. I speak once a year. That's it. And God has a sense of humor. Oh, my gosh. So I'm speaking at this event. Afterwards, one of the guys reached out to the director of marketing for an ag business. It's a $200 million company, which sounds like a lot, but compared to their competitors, they're going up against companies that are doing like $20 billion, like Pioneer, and huge companies that have been around for like 200 years that have these multi-generational relationships. And they're like, John, we have an amazing product. If we could just get meetings with these farmers that are farming like 3,000, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 acre, like we could connect with them, and I think we could win on value and product and yield and all this other stuff, but they don't even take us seriously. And I'm like, all right, tell me about how you're showing gratitude and appreciation to your current clients and to your prospects. And they're all like all proud, and they're like, oh, we send this great basket on December 15th every year. I'm like, oh gosh, baskets, really? They're like, okay, well, let's put that aside. I said, what's the date again? They said December 15th. I said, how's it working for you? And they're like, not really well. That's why we're talking to you. I'm like, okay. I said, hey, take your 80 sales reps, tell them to pick their top 20 ideal perfect clients. So 1,600 people. Not a lot of people, but it's not little people. I mean, 1,600 is legit. I said, we're going to build a campaign. You can't do things once. Like, these are people that you want to break into. They're busy. We're going to do at least 3 gifts over the course of a month. And instead of doing it in December, when would they not want to meet with you, but a gift showing up would be kind of like a surprise and be meaningful and be useful? And they said, planning season's rough. Like, sometimes these guys work 48 hours. That would be the time. I'm like, great, we're going to do it right after planning season. So we put this program together. Since they were farmers, we couldn't do like Rolexes and stuff. They wanted the theme to be around ice cream. So the first gift that we sent out was this stoneware bowl. It was handmade, represented the foundation of the company. We sent out 1,600 of these all across the Midwest. Waited a week, and then we went. I said, hey, we got to do an ice cream scoop. Cutco's got this great ice cream scoop. They said, how much is it? I said, $65. They said, $65? We get one from China for 65 cents. I said, that's true. I said, quick question. Tell me, on the low end, what's the profit of each of these farmers if you would land them? And they said, at least $100,000. And I said, how long would a typical farmer stick with you on the low end? And they said, 5 years. And I said, do you want to trust a $500,000 in profit to a 65-cent scoop or a $65 scoop? I said, which one represents, you say you're best in class, world class, first class, which represents the core values of who you are and what you represent, and do you want to, which one do you want? And they said, gosh, dang it, I guess we're buying a $65 ice cream scoop. And I said, I guess you are. So we sent out 1,600 of these scoops all across the country, Midwest mostly. And then we went to Schwann's. Anybody familiar with Schwann's, the ice cream? They've been around for like 100 years, nostalgic. We had them send off 1,600 gallons of vanilla ice cream with a little DVD inside that said, hey, we know you've worked hard, enjoy this ice cream with your family. You know you probably don't have time, but if you do, pop in this 7-minute DVD. It talks about why we think we'd be a perfect partner for you. And then a couple weeks later, the sales reps showed up to the farms, ice cream toppings in hand. Instead of getting the Heisman, and jumping on the tractor, they got invited into where? To the home. Who was there? Kids, wife, spouse, everybody. Instead of it being 20 seconds, they got 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. Oftentimes, they're invited for lunch or dinner. Now, oftentimes, people, it's one of the campaigns that it's the best. They did the exact same campaign the following year to another 1,600 prospects. That's how well it worked. It was like they blew their mind. And ironically enough, the girl I'm now married to worked on that marketing team. The boss was like, you got to meet this guy. And I'm like, really? I'm going to meet a girl from Southern Illinois? Like, that's going to work out. And she went to her and was like, you got to meet this guy. It's working with us on this gifting campaign. Oh, really? I'm going to meet some guy from Ohio? I'll tell that story some other time. Imagine, because a lot of times people get pushback, like, hey, I've done the gifting thing. I have a swag company. I do things all the time. We do gifts at Christmas. Imagine if we took that exact same campaign, everything down to the littlest detail, but instead of doing it in May, we did it in December. What would the impact have been? What would the results have been? Been 1/100th the impact. Why? Because between Thanksgiving and Christmas, you go into most offices, what is it on the conference table? It's mass chaos. There's chocolate, nuts, candy, peanuts, peanut brittle, sausages, wine, bourbon, you name it. It's ready to collapse. The timing of the gift is just as important as what you're sending. In fact, a lot of times people come to us after we speak, they're like, oh, John, we want to do this cool referral program. And I'm like, would you consider yourself to be in the relationship building business? And like, oh my gosh, yeah, we don't sell on price. We're all about relationships. I'm like, if you give a gift after a referral, what did you just turn that relationship into? Transaction. Tit for tat. You do this, you get this. Whereas if the gift shows up in the middle of April just because of the relationship, now they're inspired to give you referrals. They don't feel like they're being rewarded in a carrot and stick method. A lot of times people give you referrals not because of the gift, they give it because of the relationship. So if you treat people like human beings versus like a transaction, you'll actually get 10 times more referrals. Most people kind of feel uncomfortable. You send them cash or you send them a $100 Starbucks gift card. We don't do any referral gifting. I'll send gifts 4 times a year just because. I'll send a thank you note. I'll acknowledge the gift or the referral. But in business, the timing of the gift matters. So we don't do any gifts. I own a gifting company. It's like committing Harry Carey, but I won't let our clients send a gift between Thanksgiving and Christmas. Now, I do gifting for my kids. Like, I love celebrating, Christ's birth. But in business, all of your competitors are doing gifting at the exact same time. Most companies in retail lose money until what? Until Christmas. Everybody does it. And as an entrepreneur, I want to put $1 in and I want to get $10 back. And if you do things like everybody else does and follow the playbook of all of your clients or of all of your competitors and do gifting at the same times, it doesn't work. So if I do gifts for people, whether it's employees or not, we're always rotating. Because if you give a gift at the same time over and over again, what happens? They start to expect it. And when somebody expects something, there's only a downside if you cut it out. We all love to be surprised and delighted, but most people follow the same playbook. They give gifts at the same time. They give gifts after referral. The timing itself is just as important as what you're sending. It's that important. Fourth part of the system. This is a fun one. If you guys are the worst at this, but if you get invited to a high school graduation or to a wedding, what's one of the first 2 things that goes through your mind? Do I have to go? Some guys. The second is, I haven't seen this nephew in like 7 years. Is this a $100 relationship or is this a $200 relationship? Like, what's the least I can get away with and not be the cheap uncle? Like, oftentimes we go to, right? You know what I'm talking about. We go to the least common denominator. What's the least I can get away with? Paul was the exact opposite. He would go to a pizza shop after a basketball game and see a bunch of people that he loved, and he would say, he just lived this. It wasn't like a conscious thing. What's the most I can do here? I can pick up the tab for the little pizza shop, and he'd sign the check for $800 and sneak out the back. He was always doing the most versus the least. And so I saw this in him, and I'm like, I don't have a ton of money. I did as much gifting as I could, but I'm like, I need to go to an area where everybody goes super cheap, and I need to do the most. And not like 1 or 2% higher, like 10,000% higher. I didn't have money for fancy brochures. I didn't have money for fancy websites. And so I remember I got into Rotary. And I'm 21 years old. I'm not even out of college yet. And they almost didn't let me in because I was still in college. And I remember like a couple of the board members that were friends of mine are like, guys, Our average age of Rotary is 87 years old. This 21-year-old kid would actually be a welcomed, refreshing spirit. Can you please drop the pretenses and let this dude in? So I get in, I go to this Rotary meeting, and I remember going home, and I had this stack of business cards. And I look at all of them, and they're all the same. 1 cent, 2 cent, maybe if it's a fancy financial advisor, it has a little bit of silver foil on it. And I'm like, what if I took, everybody passes out business card, what if I took this little thing and did it the best, world class, the most amazing, and showed that little things matter. We teach people that gifting, little things matter. We all know that how somebody does one thing is often how they do everything. But how do you communicate that gifting and generosity and gratitude matter when you're this college kid? And so I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna create a $1 business card, and that's gonna show that the little things matter. And I remember telling my buddies this, and they're like, dude, you're gonna go broke passing out $1 business cards. You're gonna have one card for the CEO and a different card for the assistant. I'm like, no, I'm gonna have the same for everybody. Everybody's gonna get this. That's the worst idea ever. And so for a long time, I couldn't even find a $1 business card. I was looking, couldn't find one. And then I'm watching a movie, Will Smith. Anybody a Will Smith fan grew up in the 80s? So I'll watch anything that he's in. It's Mr. Cool. And he's in a movie called Hitch. And in there, they show his card for about a second. And that card is this little square black thing. It has his name on it, and it has his cell phone number, and that's it. I'm like, that's going to be my card. So I find an aluminum company that'll make these square cards. They'll powder coat them black. They're $1 a piece, and I have to order 100 of them. And I get invited by one of my clients, Scott's, to this luxury suite for NASCAR. And I walk in, I'm all excited. I'm wearing jeans and a jacket, and I have this huge bulge in my pocket because I'm I got all these business cards I'm ready to pass out. And in walks Robert, the CEO of Lowe's. And I'm like, holy crap, that's a multi-billion-dollar CEO right there. So I weasel my way over, kind of uncomfortably to the nachos, and hey, Robert, I shake his hand, I start talking to him, and I go into kind of subtle elevator pitch. Yeah, we do gratitude and gifting, it's a competitive advantage, we can outsource all your gifting, da-da-da. And he's glazing over, he's looking right through me, he's like, dude, I just want some nachos, can you just please leave me alone? That's what he's communicating. So I'm I'm losing him, you can tell when you're losing somebody, and I'm I need to do something. So I ask him for a card. Everybody's polite, they'll give you a card even if they're never gonna return your phone call. So I get his card, and then I hand him my card. He looks down at the card, looks up at me, looks down at the card, looks up at me, looks down at the card. He's like, that's the coolest frickin' card I've ever seen. Except he didn't say frickin'. He's like, what the heck do you do again? I got this big goofy smile. I was like, I got him. I went right back into I said the same thing. Gratitude is a competitive advantage. We can outsource your gifting. And he is hanging on every single word I say. I'm talking about this, that. He's like, yeah, you got to talk to my assistant. Yep, we do gifting. Everything changed over $1. So people started copying it. We actually decided, hey, we're going to make $3 cards. So if you're curious what a $3 business card looks like, I'll pass that around. Now, when I spoke at Google, people freaked out. They're like, $3 business card? We can't afford that. And I'm like, guys, slides in your office? Really? $3? That's going to break you? And what's interesting, I'll show hands here. Anybody spent $3 in the last week on a cup of coffee? Right? Did anybody have to talk to their spouse, talk to their accountant, plan for it, have this big debate? Anybody? No? Same $3. So what I found is that most people, it's like Seth Godin's concept. Anybody ever read Purple Cow? Show of hands. So you're driving, the main concept, if you haven't read the book, you're driving down the back road, you see brown cow, brown cow, brown cow, you're just kind of blocking it out. You see a purple cow, all of a sudden everybody's pulling off the side of the road. Why? Because a purple cow is kind of unique, it's different, it's remarkable, it's not the norm. It's still a cow. And so what we've done, it's not just about gifting. Most people, what's appropriate for gifting is $20. So they're like, oh yeah, our budget's $16.47. Meanwhile, for their dinners, they're spending $164.15. And so what we started to do is say, where are the areas where most people go super expensive? Sponsorships, advertising, Facebook, whatever else. Just a ego match there. Redirect a percentage of those marketing dollars over here where everybody goes really cheap. So we did it with handwritten notes. We're like, you don't get handwritten notes very much anymore, right? You get text messages, Facebook messages, Twitter messages. I'm like, what would the nicest handwritten note look like? So we spend $9 on a sheet of steel, and we write all of our handwritten notes on a sheet of steel. People are like, $9? And And I'm like, you'll spend $12 on a flashlight that's in the trash can 12 days later. I'll save 25%, spend $9, and that sheet of steel is shown around for 5 years. So hear me, it's not about spending more money. As entrepreneurs, as CEOs, most of us in here are privately owned. We're not going to outspend a public competitor. But what we can do is redirect our resources so that we stand out and we're the purple cow in the relationships. Like people are like, John, where's your brochure? And I'm like, most of my competitors that think that they're in the gifting space spend $25 on a fancy brochure. I'd rather spend $9 on a sheet of steel, send them to a website, have a conversation with them. I save $16 and I have 100 times more impact. Same with gifting. If people are used to receiving a $20 gift and you send them a $200 gift, like one of the reasons we send gifts, there's only two. One is just because. I don't tie it to a sales deal. I don't tie it to a record-setting year. I tie it to the relationship, whether they're a client, an employee, a vendor, doesn't matter. I treat my vendors better than most people treat their best clients. Because as a business owner, I don't even have a business without my vendors. Most people, and I challenge all you guys, as Christians, I talked to somebody the other day, like the guy was talking to a C12 member, and the guy was from Switzerland. He's like, that's interesting. What makes you guys, how do you operate differently in business than anybody else that's not a Christian? And he didn't have an answer. He's like, are we really treating our people better, differently than the rest of the world? Maybe you are. Maybe you're doing things radically different, but oftentimes gifting is like one of those things where it's like it doesn't matter. And yet in Bible times, there were still human beings. They were human beings then. A king would give another king a gift based upon what? The value of the relationship. They weren't doing trinkets and promos and whatever else. They would give 1,000 head of cattle if the relationship was important. In Proverbs, it says in 18:16, a gift ushers you before kings. Like, I'm not talking about anything here that's not biblically based. Like, I didn't invent anything. I'm just putting a spotlight on something that's been around, on biblical wisdom that's been around. And in our Western culture, in Eastern culture, which ironically enough oftentimes has nothing to do with Christianity, like how you even hand somebody a business card in Asia and in Japan matters. They'll spend $30,000 on a watch, no problem, because it's the value of the relationship. They realize that that item is a representation of how you value somebody. And so it's important, it matters. And when you can find those areas in your business, it's not just with gifting. Maybe it's sponsoring an event and everybody's there. Who cares? What if you took that $1 million and invested it into your top 1,000 relationships? Had your own event, did your own things. I won't do a dinner unless I can do it in a way that makes it a once-in-a-lifetime experience. We don't need more time away from our families. We don't need more trips away from our families. But we all have time for once-in-a-lifetime experiences. We all have time. We all have room in our lives for an artifact that represents the value of a relationship. And that's what Paul got. What's the most I can do versus what's the least I can get away with? Simple concept, but when you actually have to spend your money and your time to reflect those values, it's a whole different ballgame. Because oftentimes everybody around you is going to be like, that's insane. Why would you spend that much? You don't have to do that. You could get away with this. Sound familiar? Before I dive into the last part of the recipe in the system, I'm going to open up for Q&A. Throw curveballs, throw whatever questions you want around any of these topics. I'm happy to dive in and answer. Yeah?
How do you, obviously, the way, sorry, the last thing you just said about just because, obviously you're very purpose-driven in what you're doing. How do you maintain a sense of relationalism and not transactionalism? Because even gifting can become transactional. We're giving because I want to get your business. How do you keep it just because?
Great question. So how do you keep it just because? So oftentimes, we're sending out gifts to people and not asking for anything in return. Obviously, most of the people in here are running for-profit businesses. We know that God's wired us that when you give, like God's the ultimate gift giver, you can't outgive God. Like when you give, it's going to come back. Maybe not from that person, but from somebody else. So I don't keep track. People come up to me like, John, you sent me that gift 3 years ago, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I don't even remember. Now, I'm strategic. I will say, like, I'll take my top 20% of my top relationships and I spend 80% of my money there. Because I feel like most people do a shotgun approach and try to treat all 10,000 people the same when they're dealing with clients specifically. And I'm like, I would rather take 250 people and go all in on those people. People that I like, I enjoy, great margin, like we're a partnership versus just a transactional business. But I think a lot of what I'm teaching is like the 5 love languages. It's like how you treat your spouse. Like, if you give a gift to your spouse and then expect something in return, how does that work out for you? Not really good. But you give a gift with an open hand, knowing that if you keep making deposits in people, that it's going to work out. Like, it's just how we're wired. You know, whether you're a Christian or not, like, we're wired for reciprocity. It's how God's wired us. That's why the Bible talks about gifting, because he know, like, he's the ultimate gift giver. Like, we pour into people, like, it comes back to us 100-fold. It may not come back to us on the timetable that we want, and that's where people ruin things. Like, everybody says they play the long game, but most people's long game is like 5 weeks. The Chicago Cubs took like 7 years of gifting before they became a client. I have some people I've been gifting for longer than that they're not a client yet. So you can say you're playing the long game. You know, it's like anything else. Like, show me your checkbook and show me your calendar, and I'll tell you what your priorities are. Like, you can say, you know, generosity and being radically generous is your core value, but unless you're willing to show it, you know, gratitude's great, appreciation's great, but it's an action. Most people are like, oh, I'm grateful. And they might be really generous in their church or really generous with a charity, but we're called to be the same person in our businesses as we are in our church and in our family. And I see a lot of people saying I think Christians in particular are afraid of being taken advantage of, and so we kind of hold back. And Paul was one of those guys that he didn't hold back, and guess what? Because of it, everybody came to him with their best idea and showed their best self to him because he didn't keep track. And it's not to encourage people to be radically chaotic, but oftentimes we could be way more generous than we're being with our relationships and business, and we're holding back because we're afraid of that. So does that answer your? Cool. Oh, yes, right back there.
We're talking a lot about business and gifting to businesses and things like that, but when I step back and look at my balance wheel and things like that within C12, one of my most important relationships is my wife and my kids. So I'm just kind of mental shift here a little bit. I've been thinking about, like, you know, not just gift giving, because my wife, that isn't one of her love languages, receiving gifts, but gift giving is one of mine. So I'm just wondering now how I twist this a little bit into, you know, investing not just like material things perhaps, but even into our relationships that are most important to us. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Most of the time, we tend to marry opposites from the 5 love languages. Like, ironically enough, gift giving is not my love language. People would be like, what are you talking about? I'm like, it's actually words of affirmation. Because I'm an introvert and I got into sales, I use gifting to love on people. And guess what happens when you love on somebody as an introvert with a gift? They respond. They had to engage me. And that became my way, my competitive advantage was to love on people. It would cause that response back because I wasn't the center of the attention at the party or whatever else. But what I'd say is that I think God's wired us to have all 5 are in us, but we definitely tend to have, you know, Gary Chapman talks about a primary and then a secondary. Oftentimes you can take somebody's primary and weave it in. Like, so some people are like, oh, I want to do this experience. Like, quality time is the gift. Well, you can wave that in with an artifact, and every time they use or see that artifact, it triggers the memory of the quality time that was spent. So there's ways that you can take, I think, you know, like I said, I think we're all 5. And my goal, one of my dreams right now, I've been courting Dr. Chapman for the last couple years, and I'm hopeful that he'll write the 5 love languages for business with me. Because I feel like we talked about with giftology, it's really just loving on people. The gift is just the vehicle, the representation of that love. And I feel like in business, like the 5 love languages better teaches people what we're actually teaching, which is how to love on people well and do it in a meaningful way and do it in a real, authentic way, in a way that's not manipulative and whatever else. So I'm having dinner with him on May 30th. I'm hopeful that he'll agree, although he's 82 years old and he's already writing 4 other books. So we'll see if he'll decide to do that or not. But I would just say that I think that everything I teach in giftology and everything that he teaches, if it involves human beings, because sometimes people are like, well, I'm in technology, this doesn't work. I'm like, last time I checked, Google has 50,000 employees. Those are people. And so it's not industry specific, it's not even business specific, it's humanity specific, which all truth is God's truth, and all truth can apply. If it's human beings, it doesn't matter. And so what you're saying is 100% true. Yes?
Do you want to take a mic?
Sure.
Okay, so I love the idea of gifting. However, I'm in an industry that's highly regulated, government contracting, and I'm sure you've heard this question before.
Yeah.
So if you're giving a gift over $5, it's considered some type of bribery. So
Yep.
what are alternatives that you could do? You mentioned the love languages. I'm not going to hug the contracting officer. I don't. That's affection, but I don't know what else. So I just thought you probably thought about this.
Yeah. So there are certain industries, like if you're dealing with Walmart or Costco, it's unfortunate Western culture, we've tried to dehumanize business and relationships to try to because, groups of people take advantage of it, they bribe, they send people bass boats and, $50,000 trucks and whatever else. So we've tried to take it's like anything else, you take the 1% of people that are ruining it and then you regulate over everything. And at the end of the day, it just creates, it's not a good thing in my opinion. I think there's a bribe and then there's a gift and there's a difference. What I would say, if you have an industry where you can't do over $5, I would get the nicest paper or metal or whatever and write the nicest note that you've ever seen. Put an hour into really calling out specific things of what you appreciate in that person. There's been a study done on gratitude and happiness. If you write the nicest note on the planet to somebody and then you go read it to them in person, you're both likely to cry. And statistically, your happiness and gratitude will go up, and so will theirs. And all it cost you was your time of taking the time to put into that, and they will never get rid of that note. So I think that there are creative ways to get around some of the regulations or whatever else. In fact, the note to me is so important that when we're doing gifting for companies, I won't allow them to send out the gifts. We can't, we execute unless it has a handwritten note with it. Oftentimes the note is what communicates the context, the value, the appreciation, the whatever else. Like the gift is cool, but most of the time when you're buying gifts for people, they can afford that gift. So it's what it represents, and the note is so powerful. So oftentimes people are like, oh, we can't afford this, whatever else. I'm like, well, then cut out the gifts altogether and just write the nicest notes you've ever seen. And if you have time or if you want to invest in that relationship, go read it to them. So there are no question that there's ways that you can deepen the relationships. Yep, next.
John, thank you. This has been terrific. I work in executive recruiting, and many of the companies here, of course, have staffs that are small and also large.
Yep.
Are there any applications where you've done gifting programs for employees and showing that in a way in terms of gratitude and helping with regards to retention?
Yeah, 20% of the business that we do is for the internal customer. In fact, to me, it's so important that if people want to know a best practice, when they're working with us, they get excited about whale hunting and going prospecting. And I'm like, we're actually going to turn that whole apple cart upside down, and we're going to start with the most important customer, and that's your employees. You can't expect, I tell my team, and I tell people, you want Ritz-Carlton service? Then take your employees to the Ritz-Carlton. They can't give Ritz-Carlton service if they've never experienced it. And so I think the internal customer, we have companies that have 1,000 employees that send out gifts to all of their employees just include the family, the relationship. And that to me, it's amazing to me, people they're like, we can't afford to do that. And I'm like, well, I'm a small company and I invest $2,000 per employee on one thing. And they're like, what's that? And I say, I pay to have all of my employees' houses cleaned every other week. And they're like, how can you afford that? Even Google. They're like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, well, when you hire somebody, oftentimes it's a salary range. You're recruiting somebody, what's the salary range? It's $45,000 to $55,000. You don't even think twice about hiring somebody in that range, at the high range, 55. That's a $10,000 swing per employee. Imagine if you took half of that and said, I'm going to invest that into my employees to make their lives easier. I'm going to love on them, their spouse. I'm going to celebrate them when they show up to work for the first day versus 50 years later when they leave. It boggles my mind. People are like, yeah, we give a pen and pencil set after 15 years. I'm like, are you insane? Something that they could get at Costco or Walmart for $15, and that's what you invested in them. So to me, if you're people are like, hey, let's go take care of our top 500 relationships. And I'm like, take care of your top 50 home, and then they'll buy into and want to start loving on your people differently. And budget for it. When you're hiring people, say, this is the salary range, but this is what we're going to take. Oftentimes what I see as small business owners, they take for granted, employees take for granted the 401k. They take for granted the medical that you provide. Those are all just keep you baseline with everybody else. And it might cost you 15 grand or 20 grand or more, 30 grand. And yet when it comes time to treat them like a human being and do something different than anybody else in the marketplace, and we don't take the opportunity to love on them when they start. I'll send my interns that are working for me $300 headphones. People are like, that's wasteful. I'm like, nope. I want them to be able to block out the noise when they're studying for finals. They love it. Guess what? When I'm recruiting an intern, guess where they want to work? They want to work for me because I'm willing to model it on the front end. Most people are like, if you put in 50 years, then you get the watch. I'm like, no, you give the watch, then you get the 50 years. And so it's a whole paradigm shift of who's important in the relationships, and it's why we treat our vendors so well. So I think starting internally first in how we treat people, and obviously there's a cost to that. It's an investment, and sometimes you're going to lose people. But I'll tell you what, the paying for the house cleaning, I don't lose very many employees. And when it's time to fill the seat on the bus, they've already told all of their friends about this perk, benefit. I have some of them that their parents are doctors, and their doctors are like bragging to their friends, like, my daughter works at this giftology place. They pay to, the first thing that comes out of his mouth, they pay to have their house cleaned every other week. It cost me $2 grand. Health insurance, all this stuff are way more expensive. And so it's not, like I said, it's not always spending more money. It's taking the dollars that you're spending. It's almost looking at everything holistically, marketing, HR, all that kind of stuff, and saying, how can we invest $1 and have $100 of impact? And oftentimes starting internally first is where I would start. Yep.
So you talk about pursuing or sending gifts for years, 3 years and 4 years and 5 years. Well, Cheyenne called you. Okay, but where are you with, the one you've been sending gifts for 7 years? When do you
stop?
Well, when do you hopefully close the sale? But yeah, how long do you go? And, what are you doing in the meantime? Are you trying to get an appointment, or you're still just sending gifts?
So it's a great question. Oftentimes, it's not that I don't have the relationships established. Most of the time, if you've been sending gifts for years, they're going to take your phone call, take a meeting. But maybe it's their boss isn't bought into it. Maybe the timing's not right. Maybe, But if I believe that they're a giver, they're somebody that I want to work with, whatever else. Or what's interesting is sometimes the person I'm giving to doesn't ever become a client, but they become such a raving fan of me that they've opened up doors for me to speak at their event. Or they become an influencer. So I think oftentimes we're short-sighted and we're like, I'm going to give this gift and I better get X. And what we don't realize, it's like we're planting seeds. Some are going to go on rocky soil, aren't going to turn into anything. Some are going to grow into oak trees. And I've been doing this for 19 years, so people are like, John, you just came out of nowhere. You're on all these podcasts and radio shows and whatever else. Like, you're an overnight success. I'm like, I laugh. I'm like, I've been doing this for 19 years, planting seeds, watering seeds. Some of them, people take advantage of it and don't respond. They whatever. I misread them or whatever else. But the handful of people that grow into an oak tree more than outweigh, the people that took advantage or didn't respond or are now in another industry. But what's interesting is, one of the most powerful things that you can have in business is your network. Right? Most people would say, like, their network is their net worth. I know a number of people that talk about that. To be able to have somebody willing to take your phone call, to have somebody willing to advocate for you, it's powerful. It can't be bought. Those are those relational ties. So I don't always measure it by, did I get the deal or not? Did I influence that person? Did I impact them? Are they inspired to go treat their spouse differently? Are they whatever? And so it's not always a bottom line issue. And as long as my bottom line is strong enough to be able to weather the storms or whatever else, then I'm okay. But there's definitely times where I'm continuing to gift. I'm like, I don't know what this is going to turn into.
I'm going to stop here just for a second to say, she's got 4 out of 5, right? And you're all waiting with bated breath. So let's move to the 5th one, because that's a really very cool story.
Sorry, guys. If you have other questions, you're welcome to come and ask them, or I can talk to Mike and maybe we do a webinar or something where you guys can bring your teams on and ask more questions or dive into things a little bit more deeper if that's a value. Because I know oftentimes people are like, I didn't get to ask my question, and that's kind of frustrating when you travel all this way to be here. So if that's helpful, we can try to set something up. So the last part of the system, number 5. about 12 years ago, 13 years ago, when I sold half the business, I thought it was to grow and expand. So what would they really want is the part of the recipe. I sold half the business. I'm like, man, we're going to crush this. We're growing. All these great things are happening. And then in the course of about 12 months, everything that could go wrong in a business owner, entrepreneur's world went wrong. I started dating this girl, the seed corn girl. She quit her job, went on a mission trip, and moved to Ohio to be close so we could have this, start to a relationship. And that summer, or before that summer, my business partner came and was looking at the bottom line and some of the numbers and was like, John, did you authorize this withdrawal? Are these expenses that you did? And I'm like, no. I'm like, the only other person that has access to that is Amy. Now, Amy had been with me since college. She went and got her CPA. She was my CPA. She was my accountant. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like Amy's stealing. Like this is crazy. Like the person who has been with me through this whole realm. And I remember like it was yesterday. We showed up at her house about a week later, as all my employees work remotely, and with a U-Haul. And she was married to somebody who's 7'2", like 340 pounds, and he was home that day. And we had to fire her and remove everything out of her house. And anybody have employees steal? Anybody? Okay. It's like, just feels betrayed. It's just a horrible feeling. And I'm crying, she's crying. I'm thinking like her husband's gonna kill me. Like it was just like worst day ever. So we did that. A couple months later, we go back to Lindsay's hometown. I'm meeting her family for the first time. Like this is like a big weekend. It's Labor Day weekend. And on Sunday night, I started getting a phone call. It's 11 o'clock. It's my mom. I'm like, Mom, I'm away on this weekend. Like, why are you calling? And she called once, and then twice, and then a third time. I'm like, something's wrong. My mom's one of 13 kids. She doesn't get easily rattled. She raised 6 kids. And when I picked up the phone, she's shrieking. She's crying. I can't understand what she's saying. I'm like, Mom, calm down. I can't understand. And all I could hear was the word Xander. Now, Xander's my 18-month-old nephew, my brother's son. And I'm like, what's with Xander? Finally, she gets out. Xander's dead. I'm like, what are you talking about? She was at a swim party. He got away. He got opened the glass door. He got out before anybody saw him. He didn't make it. I'm bawling. Lindsay's there with me. I'm like, I got to be with my brother. He lives 12 hours away in Tulsa. Hang up the phone, jump in the car. Lindsay's like, you're a mess. You can't go by yourself. She jumps in the car with me to drive all through the night. And I don't know if you've ever been to a kid's funeral or not, but there's certain things about it that I'll never forget. And there's other periods of time where like it's almost like it was all blur. And we were there for a week. That was the first time Lindsay met my family, and she was there the entire week. And so I come back home from that, and there's an envelope waiting for me when I get there, and it has 3 letters on it. And if you're a business owner, it's the 3 letters you never want to see. IRS, yeah. All 7 years worth of taxes were done wrong. And so I started going through this audit, and it's about 2007, 2008. Guess what else is happening? I'd invested in real estate and other companies and all this other stuff, and all at once, everything started to collapse. And my business partner didn't take a draw for 2 years. I started taking a draw of $1,000 a month take home for those next 2 years. I refused to go bankrupt. I'm like, we'll pay things off. We'll figure it out. We'll liquidate stuff. My partner's like, hey, just go sell. Go be able to build relationships. I'll handle this. And so Lindsay, for those 2 years, she just moved to Ohio, knew nobody other than me. And to say it was the worst 2 years of her life would be an understatement. I mean, it was like I was the worst boyfriend. I was barely keeping my lips above water. And she ended up moving back. She got a job in St. Louis. So we were doing the long-distance relationship thing. And she's like, it was rocky. Like, it was just not a great way to start a relationship. And one of my mentors was like asking me, he's like, tell me about the relationship and talk about it. And he's like, why aren't you committing to her? Why aren't you getting married? Is she the one? I'm like, yeah, she's the one. He's like, well, why are you waiting? I'm like, because I'm broke as a joke. I can't even afford a ring. I can't afford a wedding. I can't afford anything. He's like, you just got to find a way. And like, who cares about all that stuff? Just commit, get married. And so I'm like, you're right, I'm going to lose this girl. So I'm like, I need to create an experience for the engagement that's better than anything I've ever done for a client. That makes like the Brooks Brothers story look like child's play. Like in my head, I'm like, what's the most I can do? So I start cooking up like, I'm going to make this like 100 times better than anything that's ever been done. And one of our favorite movies, I'm a hopeless romantic, the movie The Notebook. Anybody ever seen The Notebook? Okay, it's like on TBS like 3 times a day. It's like on repeat. So if you haven't seen it, it's this very romantic movie through war and breakup and come back together. And the cool part is the couple on the right is them on the left when they're older, and the notebook that he reads is their story together, and she has Alzheimer's. And he goes and reads her that story every day. And she remembers who she is for about 10 minutes. So he gets her back for 10 minutes a day. So I'm like, I'm going to create our notebook. And I write down like 90 pages of our story. And pour everything I have into this thing. And I mean, details she would have thought I'd forgotten. And the plan was my brother just graduated from film school, and I'm like, I'm going to create a movie of this so we can go back and watch it. And she's in St. Louis, I'm in Cleveland. She's going to be flying for Valentine's Day. And she's not expecting an engagement. She knows I'm broke as a joke. And so the morning of, I would fly into St. Louis. I would get disguised with latex makeup and false teeth and gain 180 pounds. Like my brother would transform me into a 95-year-old man. And I had arranged with Continental to be sitting on the plane next to her. And when she would get this notebook delivered to her, she would start reading it and listening to the iPod mini that I'd recorded myself. And it talks about, at the end, growing old together. And will you love me when I've gained 180 pounds and all this other stuff? And she'd realize that she's not sitting next to an old dude, she's sitting next to me. And in the back of it was sealed with wax, so I could break open the ring. It was like Shawshank Redemption style. The ring was back there. I could get down on one knee at 30,000 feet. My brother would capture all this on film. We'd land. Her family had driven 9 hours and was in a stretch Hummer limo with my family, and our 200 closest friends were ready to celebrate at our favorite restaurant. That's what was supposed to happen. So morning of, we do a makeup run, or the night before we do a makeup run, the next day we fly in, we go to a bathroom stall, he transforms me into a 95-year-old man, puts me in a different part of the airport, and Lindsay arrives, gets this package, opens it up, starts listening to it, she's on cloud 9, she's reading the book, she just got in from work, and it's pre-boarding time, so they come over, old people get on first, they come over to escort me onto the plane, and I go to hand my ticket, and I collapse. My brother's like, is he like playing like old, like he's like falling and he can't get up? Like, is he just hamming this up? But I'm not moving. The flight attendant's like, sir, sir, sir. They roll me over, I'm unconscious and there's blood everywhere. My brother's like, that's not part of the plan. So they're like, call 911. Another pilot gets off the plane, comes over, sees an old guy unconscious. What do they think? He's having a heart attack. So they pull the defibrillator off the wall. They start cutting the clothes off. Now Lindsay's watching this, like, where's this old guy's person? Like, why is he by himself? And then all at once the wig comes off, and she's like, that's not an old guy, that's John. And when I say meltdown, I'm talking like 5-alarm stage meltdown. Like, they have to build a wall of people around me to keep her away. They can't stabilize me. They put the pads on, and it says to shock me. I'm bouncing off the ground, I'm projectile vomiting, they can't stabilize. Meanwhile, guess who else gets a phone call when there's a guy in disguise getting on an airplane? FBI. FBI shows up, it's asking questions. Lindsay's just like, a mess, my business. So the ambulance shows up, they put me in the ambulance, they won't let anybody in because Lindsay's not family. She goes in the back of the cop car with my brother, she's crying, she's praying, and she's not even sure if I'm alive, and she finds out from the cop that I was gonna propose. And she's devastated, she's just like distraught. We go to the hospital, they put me in the ICU, breathing machine, CAT scans, MRIs, everything. She's holding my hand all through the night. Next morning, I wake up, I take the breathing machine out, and I'm on these drugs, and so I'm like half there, and I open my eyes, I'm like, did I get engaged? and Lindsay, and I'm like, they're like, no, you almost died, and this happened, this happened, this happened, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it makes the story even better. Like, it's like Romeo and Juliet, but I didn't die. And so I think it's the coolest thing ever, but I keep forgetting because I'm on these drugs, and I keep asking every 5 minutes, what happened? Did I get engaged? And Lindsay is over in the corner and is shout, like she's almost like PTSD, like she's just shaken to her core. And the doctor comes in and is like, John, like, have you changed anything about your diet or anything? Like, what have you done the last couple weeks? And I said, yeah, I do this every year. I do something health related. I gave up carbs and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, okay, that's fine, but what did you eat yesterday? I'm like, I was so nervous I didn't eat anything. I was in disguise, airport. He's like, what'd you drink? I'm like, nah, nothing. I didn't want to mess up the makeup. He's like, you had a low blood sugar seizure that the machine misdiagnosed, and when you got shocked, you should have died because you're not supposed to get shocked by that when you don't need it. He's like, you should have died. I'm like, but I didn't. Doesn't that make the story better? And Lindsay wants to murder me. She's like, are you an idiot? Like, you almost died. Like, that's the worst day of my life. Like, and I think it's the funniest thing, and she thinks it's the worst thing ever. So 6 days later, fortunately, she says yes on the plane, reading the book with no disguise. And 6 months later, we get married, have 3 beautiful daughters, and our relationship always struggled with this, a number of things, but this in particular. I'd go to an event, people would want me to tell the story. Lindsay would be like, that's the worst story ever, don't tell it. And I tell the story, everybody loves it. And we'd go up to the hotel room, and it would be like fireworks. She'd be like, so you're an idiot, that was the worst day ever. And I'm like, I almost died for you, you don't appreciate me. And so 5 years ago, a mentor of mine's asking me about Lindsay and her perfect day and whatever else and what she like. And I'm like, oh, for her birthday, like she would want like an itinerary or something. Like she wants to know what clothes to wear a month in advance and all this other stuff. And I'm like, it's just horrible. And he's like, so does she like surprises? And I'm like, oh my gosh. It was like somebody hit me in the mouth with a baseball bat and in the gut at the same time. I'm like, oh my gosh, she hates surprises. Like hates surprises. I took a step back. It took me a few days to just gather myself. I had this pit in my stomach. And I was like, oh my gosh, I made that entire engagement story about what I like. I like the surprise. I'd blindfold me and take me to Africa. Like, she wanted a simple, just the two of us. No fanfare, no 200 people, no story. She just wanted to start a life together. I love surprises and the big show. I wanted to be on Oprah, like all these things. And I made it all about myself. And then when I started to process it, I went and apologized to her 100 times and was like, I'm such an idiot. And I started to realize in business, we do the exact same thing. When we like golf, we take people golfing. When we give a gift, we put our logo on it, make it all about us, our company colors. It's all, whether it's an employee or client. When we like steak, we send steak. A gift by its very nature, like the reason God's a good gift giver is he gives the gift that we need. He gives the gift about us, not about himself. Like if we start to give gifts, and focus on the other people. That's why the house cleaning works. If I gave them the option, they'd take the $2,000. But when we make it about them and making their life better, and we give gifts like the knives, people are like, why do the stupid knives work? They work because they're used. They include the family. They become artifacts. Like breaking bread and eating still works 2,000 years later. We're still human beings. And so when we work with companies, we're like, make the gift about the recipient. Think about giving a gift. If you give a gift in a wedding with the couple, you'd never engrave your logo on it. You'd never engrave compliments of John Ruhlin. You'd engrave the couple's name. You'd engrave their wedding date. You'd make it about them. And in business, it's the same thing. When you can start to love on people and put yourself in their shoes and say, how can I honor you? And not tie things to a carrot and stick method and just love on people just because they're humans. Powerful things start to happen. When we're acknowledged and appreciated, we all crave that. In business, doesn't matter. And as human beings. And so if you're thinking, I already kind of pulled the punchline of like, I'm not a great gift giver because gifting is my love language. But I've been focusing on it with my budget, my intentionality, my time, my energy. Anybody, you don't have to hire a firm like ours. You can do this on your own. And oftentimes people reach out and like, I want help with my spouse gift. I'm like, I can't help you. You should have been listening the last 12 months instead of playing fantasy football or whatever. Like, we already put our time and our attention and our schedule. Like anybody can be amazing at this. We love working with companies and helping them execute the plan and fulfill and scale and all that kind of stuff. But at a core level, I call it the gratitude muscle. God's given us all of it. Like we can, if you focus on it and work on it, one of the exercises that's great is write down every day for 30 days. Then a journal, you can get a cool journal called the 5-minute journal. It's a cool one. But write down every day 3 people that you're grateful for. And when we look at our business careers, oftentimes there's thousands of people that have allowed us to get to where we're at. Clients, partners, vendors, mentors, advisors, investors, bankers, you name it. You write down 3 for 30 days, that's 100 people. You write down 3 for a year, that's 1,000. And you don't have to do some extravagant gift for everybody, but you can write a handwritten note, you can pick up and make the phone call, do the words of appreciation. You could send them a gift. But at a core level, this isn't industry specific, this is humanity specific. This is how God's wired us. So I challenge you, go do this in some capacity for the next 3 years. Be radically generous. Put the system in place. Don't cut corners. And come back to me in 3 years and say it wasn't worth it, that it hasn't paid dividends. In your family, in your business, your employees, you do that and magical things, God things start to happen. Thank you, guys.